This beauty influencer and her husband spent months planning only for their plan to completely collapse because they forgot one minor detail. They didn't own the building where the crime was supposed to happen. And now, because of that, they both got life in prison. So you may be asking, okay, how does a beauty influencer get life in prison? Well, before all that happened, Lucy came from a life that many people would describe as quite cushy. She grew up in a wealthy Toronto family. She was the daughter of a successful financial advisor and a businesswoman. She had two sisters, and she was reportedly shy, studious, and far removed from the image that she would later live online, because reportedly her mom had hoped that she would continue building a career in the family business. But Lucy, I guess, had very different plans, because together with her sisters, Caitlin and Jane, she launched the Mia Triplets social media brand, which consisted of them making short form content and I guess a whole bunch of videos and pictures of them in swimsuits. So apparently they didn't want to go the route their parents wanted them to go, and decided to go for social media fame. Now, getting convicted of is probably not what the mother had in mind, but I can only imagine that she was probably a little bit disappointed when she had three daughters. She wanted one of the daughters to run her company, and now all three of them are dancing in swimsuits on TikTok. But regardless of that, the mother definitely helped, because unlike a bunch of other aspiring influencers, Lucy wasn't exactly struggling to make ends meet, because her mother provided her with a monthly allowance of around $5,000, giving her the freedom to focus on social media full time and also just travel and build her online persona. And she spent her time posting content, going on vacations, and trying to grow an audience while, I guess, presenting kind of this luxury lifestyle. Then, around the same time, someone from her past re-entered the picture. His name was Oliver Carafa. And I guess if Lucy wanted to look rich and successful online, Oliver wanted people to believe he already was. So the two briefly dated in high school, lost touch, and eventually reconnected as adults. But I don't think anyone expected the outcome of these two reconnecting, because that would be a failed entrepreneur, a fake business empire, an international manhunt, and one of the strangest plots I've covered in a long time. Because if you looked at Oliver's social media or watched him bounce from one venture to another, he seemed determined to become a very successful entrepreneur. The problem was that, I guess, the success part never seemed to happen. And I guess, like Lucy, Oliver also came from a very comfortable background, and his family owned a successful bakery business in Slovakia. And after moving to Canada, he never really had to worry about money whatsoever. His friends described him as someone who would always want to look successful. He dressed the part, he talked the part, and he constantly told people that he was going to be a millionaire before he turned 30. But there was one problem. His actual track record didn't really match that image, because years before meeting back up with Lucy, Oliver had already become involved in a tragedy that would have completely changed the course of his life. Because in 2012, after a night of drinking, he got behind the wheel of his Range Rover with a friend named David Chang. According to court records, Oliver was driving at least twice the speed limit when he lost control and slammed into a pole. And the impact was awful. David lost his life while Oliver walked away alive at just 19 years old. And now suddenly, Oliver was convicted of dangerous driving, causing death, and criminal negligence, causing death, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. For most people, that would be the moment that forces some serious self-reflection. But even while in prison, Oliver reportedly struggled to follow rules. Prison officials accused him of participating in prohibited phone calls and suspected him of involvement with all sorts of stuff that he shouldn't be involved in. Bro apparently wanted to smuggle contraband into the institution. He affiliated with all the wrong people. And at one point, he was moved from minimum security to a medium security. And when parole officers reviewed the case, they described him as someone with an abnormal sense of entitlement, who appeared to believe the rules applied to everyone except for him. So it seems like entitlement seems to be the thing that this couple has in common for sure. So when Oliver was finally released, he seemed set on reinventing himself. He even started using the name Oliver Knox in some business dealings. So over the next few years, he launched what felt like a never-ending list of new ventures. There was a restaurant, there was a travel business, there was a drop shipping operation, an insulin company, a medical MJ venture. The dude was essentially just jumping from trend to trend, it looks like, with this list. And it seems like none of these businesses have anything to do with each other. So it doesn't even seem like he's carrying too much experience from a past business into the new one he went. He was just like, okay, I'm gonna try this. Oh, it didn't work out. Let's try this. Uh-oh, that didn't work out. Okay, let's try this. That didn't work out either. Oh man. But I mean, that's just the reality of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is extremely hard. And if you really want to succeed in anything, you kind of have to grind at it for a couple of years. This guy seemed to jump ship every few months. So I guess the business has changed constantly, but the sales pitch never really changed because according to Oliver, he made it seem like he was just one deal away from becoming a wealthy entrepreneur, like he wanted everyone to believe he already was. I mean, if you look at like a lot of the extremely successful people, they do kind of have that delusional optimism mentality, which is very good for entrepreneurship, but there is a certain point where you also need to apply a lot of work over a long period of time. And it seems like he wasn't applying a lot of work over a long period of time here. But I mean, hey, at the end of the day, the dude was convicted of so I don't really need to sugarcoat it too much. Technically, it was just a massive skill issue. But regardless, when he reconnected with Lucy in 2018, he found someone who was chasing a very similar dream. She wanted internet fame. He wanted business success. A match made in heaven. What could go wrong? But regardless, both were obsessed with the image of having made it. And for a while, that seemed like the perfect match. So both of them, I guess, were just gonna fake it till they made it. But the problem is, appearances can only carry you for so long because eventually reality catches up. And for Oliver, reality arrived in the form of a man by the name of Tyler Pratt and a business deal that was about to go very wrong. And it seems like, from all accounts I've read, Oliver was fairly good at faking being successful. Now, was he good at actually being successful? Doesn't seem like it. But good at faking it? Apparently. So, I mean, at least he had that going for him. But the problem is, he was hard to audit. Like, no one could really get a feel for where his money was coming from. It just didn't make sense. But still, Oliver had a talent for, I guess, selling the dream. He dressed well, he talked like a businessman, and he always seemed to have another opportunity around the corner. And obviously, he was dating a triplet who was a beauty influencer, and eventually that confidence attracted the attention of a man by the name of Tyler Pratt. Now, Tyler wasn't exactly your typical investor either. By his own statement, he'd previously been involved in, how do I say this? Moving around that white powder across some borders here and there, across some state borders, maybe some international borders. But he was moving around some of that white powder. But regardless, that was behind him now. And now he wanted to move into legitimate business ventures. Because somewhere along the way, he crossed paths with Oliver. And those two, they started discussing an opportunity which involved a personal protective equipment during the pandemic. At the time, PPE was big business. Companies everywhere were just trying to get a hold of any PPE possible because there wasn't enough of it. Because obviously, this was right after the pandemic happened and everyone was scrambling for masks, gloves, medical supplies, and so on and so on. So, I mean, to me, this kind of looks like they were just trying to buy it all in bulk and resell it. So it's not like they were like investing in a factory that could actually make more of this stuff. No, they just wanted to be a middleman in the chain. But regardless, Tyler really wanted to capitalize off of this because these people just seemed like awesome people. And I guess he thought that Oliver could just get a hold of inventory. And over time, he invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into this venture. And depending on which source you grab from, it's like roughly $500,000. And obviously, he was planning on actually making a return on that money. And I guess for Oliver, this was the kind of opportunity that he always wanted. Someone finally believed in the image that he had spent years creating. The only problem was reality really started catching up almost immediately because according to prosecutors, the PPE business wasn't generating the returns that Tyler had been promised. And that's when the questions really started piling up. Oliver allegedly responded the same way a lot of bad fraudsters do, by buying time. I guess there were just excuses, there were explanations, there were promises the money was coming. And of course, when all that stopped working, there were allegedly fake invoices and forged contracts meant to convince Tyler that everything was still under control. This dude was essentially using Adobe Acrobat trying to keep his head above water. But eventually, I guess you just run out of paperwork to blame. And this is just so crazy to me because it just shows how incompetent Oliver is. Because like, dude, if you are raising capital, the person who is investing into you, right? They are approaching this, or at least, okay, wait, well, actually, it depends on the person you take, who are you taking money from? If you are raising money from a dude who was moving white powder and now this is his big way to go legit, honestly, you probably shouldn't be raising money from him. You should probably be raising money from an accredited investor. But then the next question is, would an accredited investor actually give money to Oliver? Probably not. But okay, in a traditional sense, right? The investor should understand the risk that he's going into when he's investing into a company. And all businesses don't automatically work. So if the business isn't giving the estimated return. It's not like you immediately jump to forging documents and making fake excuses. Like, what's going on here? Like, how did this investor pitch go? Were they sitting at like some Nobu and Oliver here was just going full on LARP mode going, yeah, man, if you give me $500,000, I'll give you millions. We'll make millions, dude. We'll be rich. So much of it's just so confusing because it's like, buddy, why are you forging I don't know. But regardless, he started forging documents because the guy is clearly extremely incompetent. And here we are, because this is where the story takes a hard left turn. Because according to the Crown, Oliver immediately jumped to, you know, instead of saying, hey man, I failed and lost the money. Also, like, that's like honestly kind of impressive that he took $500,000 and he probably blew it on lifestyle. This is probably why he jumped to this conclusion. So I guess instead of just admitting to the guy that he's a complete failure and probably a con artist and probably just spent all this money on, I don't know, lifestyle, he came to his own conclusion that, yeah, let's just take his life. What? And unfortunately for Tyler Pratt and his pregnant girlfriend, Jordan Romano, they had no idea what he was about to walk into. Because the plan was for Tyler Pratt to believe that he was being invited to look at the property that could be used for a future business venture. And the building was supposedly connected to Lucy's family, making the meeting seem at least somewhat legitimate. And if everything went according to plan, Tyler would then show up, see the property, discuss business, and never leave. The problem is, almost nothing about this plan actually worked. In the days leading up to the meeting, Oliver and Lucy began laying out the groundwork for what they thought would be the perfect crime. They acquired a getaway vehicle, they borrowed a SIM card from a friend, they worked on creating alibis. Lucy even planned to leave her apartment wearing a blonde wig so security footage would make it appear like she never left her home at all. This is like Whittle-Dee and Twiddle-Dum trying to plot. This is so messed up. Yeah, ma'am, a blonde wig will absolutely fool the FBI. Don't worry about it. Also, how naive and stupid do you have to be to think that a blonde wig is going to fool the people that dedicate their lives to solving crime? Really? Sorry, I'm just still stuck on that point. And that's honestly not even the start of it, because where the story starts earning its reputation for being one of the dumbest crimes people have ever heard of is on February 28th, 2021, Tyler didn't come alone. He brought his pregnant girlfriend, Jordan Romano. The couple drove into the industrial property in Stony Creek expecting nothing more than just a business meeting. But then Oliver and Lucy ran into a pretty significant problem. The warehouse they were claiming belonged to Lucy's family was locked. How didn't they think of that? Oh, whoops. The property that we don't own, nor does our family own, may be locked. I'm just baffled here. So according to reporting and trial testimony, they arrived and attempted to gain access, only to discover that they couldn't actually get into the building, the one they claimed that, you know, her family was owning. But hey, that created an immediate problem because it's pretty hard to convince someone that you own a property when you're standing outside, jiggling the door handle and acting like I guess you forgot the keys. And Tyler really started noticing. And at that point, prosecutors say the entire plan really started to unravel because whatever story had been prepared suddenly was not working whatsoever. Tyler was becoming suspicious. Jordan eventually returned to wait inside of her vehicle, and the fake business meeting was going nowhere. But that's when panic took over, because what was supposed to be a carefully planned plot was suddenly becoming extremely messy, public, and unpredictable. And what happened next is the reason that Oliver eventually stopped arguing that he was completely innocent, and instead focused on convincing jurors the wasn't planned, because nobody dispute that shots were fired. As Jordan was sitting inside of the Range Rover waiting for the meeting to wrap up, Oliver pulled out a firearm and just started opening fire. How did you think you were going to get away with that? What? And Jordan was struck in the chest, and another one hit Tyler Pratt. And by the time all of this stopped, Tyler was no longer here and Jordan was critically wounded. But what Oliver would later argue was that the meeting had spiraled out of control and bullets just so happened to go flying. It wasn't premeditated, trust me, guys. But of course, prosecutors pointed to everything that had happened beforehand: the fake property meeting, the disguises, the borrowed SIM cards, the getaway vehicle, and of course, the effort to lure Tyler into an isolated location, as I guess evidence that this had been planned long before anyone arrived that afternoon. And then came the part of the story that neither Oliver nor Lucy could have really anticipated. Jordan survived. Thankfully, because despite being struck with a bullet in the chest, she managed to crawl away from the scene and eventually flag down a passing motorist for help. And tragically, the trauma caused her to lose her child, but she was alive. And that fact would become a massive problem for the couple, because if your victim survives, they can tell everything. Meanwhile, Oliver and Lucy allegedly weren't even aware that she'd survived, because after leaving the scene, they returned home and started discussing their next move. But then reports began appearing that a woman had been found alive after all of this in Stony Creek. So, that's not ideal for them. Like, imagine the panic when you've spent months planning probably the dumbest crime ever. Let's be real. I mean, this is up there for sure. But regardless, I guess they were just so dumb they didn't even realize how dumb they were, and they thought they eliminated all the witnesses. But then they turn on the news and realize, uh-oh, one of them survived. And then on top of that, she's also talking to investigators. So from that moment on, the focus shifted from committing the crime to trying desperately to cover it up. And if what happened up until now was sloppy, it was about to get a whole lot sloppier. We're reaching new levels of slop here with this. So for the next several hours, the couple drove around the city trying to get rid of all evidence. Clothing disappeared, vehicles were abandoned, items connected to everything, they were just tossed away. But their big problem was they seemed to be doing all of it while passing directly in front of security cameras. A lot of security cameras. But as police began piecing together what had happened in Stony Creek, Oliver and Lucy were already preparing for the next phase of their plan, getting as far away from Canada as possible. So the escape plan probably sounded impressive when they discussed it, but I mean, if you look at it, you're like, what's going on here? But this was their plan, apparently. Leave the city, head to Montreal, fly to Europe, use fake passports, start over somewhere nobody knows who you are. The problem is, that's a whole lot easier said than done. Because unlike, I guess, Hollywood criminals that do this in the movies, Oliver and Lucy had apparently left a whole bunch of evidence for the investigators. Because after all this happened, the couple actually made their way to Montreal and eventually boarded a flight to Hungary. And for a brief period, it looked like they might actually pull it off. They were thousands of miles away from Canada and living under assumed identities. But that victory lap didn't really last too long, because just over 3 months after everything happened, Hungarian authorities tracked them down and arrested both of them in Budapest. And I guess this is when finally the relationship that carried them through, you know, the plot, the cover-up, and the international getaway, that's when it finally started to crack. Because it's one thing to be Bonnie and Clyde when you're posting photos, spending money, and talking like, hey, we're just gonna be bajillionaires in the future. But obviously things are very different when you're sitting in a jail cell waiting to find out if you're gonna spend the rest of your life behind bars or not. Because Lucy actually waived extradition and agreed to return to Canada. Oliver, he fought it, which I guess kind of makes sense because number one, Oliver pulled the trigger, and number two, if you remember from earlier, he had that whole drunk driving crash, which also led him to face a whole lot of time in prison before. But obviously he knew this time this was premeditated. But eventually both of them ended up back in Canada, where prosecutors began assembling the case against them. And for a while, it looked like Lucy might actually have an advantage. She was released on a multi-million-dollar bail package and allowed to await trial under strict conditions in her family's North York mansion. And now, if you've never been accused of before, here's a good rule of thumb. When a judge lets you await trial at home instead of jail, that's genuinely something you should not mess up. But Lucy immediately messed up, because while her mother was away for business, Lucy left the house and went to lunch with her sisters, and later visited a luxury condo to use the gym, which is one of those details that just sound almost too stupid to be true. What? Would you rather be stuck in jail than in your parents' cushy multi-million-dollar mansion waiting for your trial? Like, what was the thought process here? But I guess Lucy thought it was gym day, so she just would like to spend the rest of her time in jail until she was sentenced. Like, how is this possible? It's like she had a quick lobotomy in Eastern Europe before they extradited her back home. But obviously, the result was exactly what you would expect. Authorities accused her of breaching her conditions, and just like that, she found herself back in custody. Congratulations, you are a genius. So then she had to spend years in jail waiting for the trial. And when the trial finally happened, Oliver and Lucy were not going to walk into court as a united front. In fact, their legal strategies were about to become even more bizarre than the crime itself, because one would admit to doing it all, but deny planning it, and the other one would essentially argue that she had no idea what her own husband was doing. And somehow, those weren't even the strangest arguments the jury was about to hear, because By the time the trial finally began, Oliver and Lucy were no longer acting like a couple trying to beat the charges together. If anything, they seemed to be preparing to just blame each other. The Crown's theory was that Oliver had burned through roughly $500,000 that Tyler Pratt had invested into the PPE venture. And when Tyler started asking questions and expecting answers, Oliver allegedly decided it would be easier to just eliminate the problem than admit the money was gone. And Lucy, I guess prosecutors argued, wasn't some innocent bystander. She helped set the plan in motion, helped lure the victims to the property, and helped cover everything up afterwards. But then the defenses started. So Oliver didn't testify, but through his lawyer, he essentially admitted the part that most defendants spend a trial, trying to deny. Yes, he pulled the trigger on Tyler, and yes, he pulled the trigger on Jordan. And I guess the argument wasn't that he didn't do it. The argument was that he wasn't planning to do it. So in other words, Oliver's team wanted the jury to believe that this wasn't first degree. And he wanted the jury to believe that this was a meeting that somehow got way out of control and turned into violence. But then Lucy took the stand. And instead of backing up her husband's version of events, she basically, completely blew that one up, because Lucy testified that while the couple was hiding out in Hungary, Oliver confessed to her that he had planned all of the because he couldn't repay Tyler's investment money and was terrified of what would happen when Tyler found out. And according to Lucy, Oliver admitted the whole thing had been premeditated from the start. One can only think that that is not the testimony her spouse was hoping for. But at the same time, Lucy insisted that she had no idea any of this was happening. So also, apparently she was lying. So here she portrayed herself as someone who had been swept along by Oliver's lies. That could be true, but she was claiming that she didn't know anything about the plot. She didn't know what he intended to do that day and only learned the truth later. That was a lie. Regardless though, that created a very awkward situation in court because Lucy was essentially asking the jury to believe two things at once. First, Oliver was absolutely guilty of planning everything, and second, that she somehow had nothing to do with any of it despite being there for the fake property meeting, the drive afterwards, and, the destruction of evidence, and of course, the international flight to Hungary. Needless to say, the prosecutors were not buying it, and then came one of the strangest moments in the entire trial because Lucy's defense team leaned heavily into the argument that she wasn't some criminal mastermind. In fact, they suggested that she was so naive and superficial, and I guess so disconnected from what was happening around her, that she simply didn't understand what Oliver was doing. And this really makes me wonder, how often is this used as a defense strategy? Because the defense strategy here was essentially, Your Honor, my client is too clueless to be found guilty here. Duh. But after weeks of testimony, mountains of evidence, and two defendants that really just wanted to bury each other, the case finally landed in the jury's hands. And despite the wildly different stories being told by Oliver and Lucy, the jury wasn't convinced by either one of them. They rejected Oliver's claim that him pulling the trigger wasn't planned, and they rejected Lucy's claim that she was simply an innocent wife caught up in someone else's scheme. It would be fair to say though, without Oliver, she would have never been a part of this whatsoever. Dude's just an all-around failure. But regardless, jurors found them both guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Tyler Pratt and guilty of attempted murder for the shooting of Jordan Romano. And at one point during the proceedings, the court actually remarked that Lucy may be the stupidest person in the room. I believe it, but that's obviously not the same thing as saying that she's innocent, because the defense had spent so much time portraying Lucy as naive, superficial, and completely unaware of what was happening around her that the discussion had shifted from whether she understood the plan to whether anyone could realistically be that oblivious. And I guess at some point, asking jurors to believe you had absolutely no idea what was happening becomes pretty tough to sell. But in the end, Oliver and Lucy received the same sentence: life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 25 years, which is probably not where either of them wanted to be. But again, honestly, just this whole thing is just a massive skill issue. One wanted to be a millionaire before 30, and the other one wanted to become a social media star. Instead, both of them essentially became famous for not the reason they wanted. And it all started because the dude, I guess, didn't want to admit that he squandered away some investor money. GG. But as for the triplets, the TikTok group that she had with her sisters, it's still up, but now only 2 of the sisters are listed in the bio. So that derailed that career as well. I guess they should just rebrand from the Mia triplets to the Mia twins for now. But yeah, that's the story of how a beauty influencer went to prison for life for planning a murder and planning it really, really poorly. So if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, drop a like if you enjoyed this video. And also, if you want to support the channel, you can go to gamersubs.gg/Atozy. And you can get one of these bad boys. They're available for a limited time only. And I think it's one of the coolest shaker cups on the website. Look at that. We even got the blue shaker inside. Look at that. It's kind of cool. I'm just overall super happy with how it all came out, because we try to color code the lid to the bushes and the blue cap to the lakes and the windows in it. And obviously the blue shaker piece that's inside. Obviously, it's removable, so you can wash it and so on. So yeah, if you want another way to support the channel, you can go to gamersubs.gg/Atozy and pick up one of those, or you can get anything else from Gamersubs, because they have a whole bunch of wonderful beverages that are all sugar-free. Some are caffeine-free, some have caffeine in them. So just pay attention to what you're getting there. But other than that, see you guys in the next video. Peace.